The winter air in Boston, Massachusetts was crisp, and while silence enveloped the city, only the Walker family mansion across the street was wrapped in warm light. On Sunday afternoon, a family meeting was taking place under the large chandelier. The Browns' property deal was finalized last week too. The high-rise apartment with a view of Central Park should close next month. Richard Walker's voice was filled with the confidence of a successful man. Seated at the head of the table, he exuded an air of dignity. Walker Real Estate has been leading the industry in Boston for 40 years. That's wonderful, Richard, his wife Martha smiled. After working as a high school teacher for 30 years, she now served as a board member for a prominent local charity. Maintaining a refined beauty, the luxurious pearl necklace gleamed subtly around her neck. I must tell everyone at the country club. Dad, you're amazing, Caroline said brightly. She served as the sales director at her father's real estate company and was already regarded as his successor. Today too, dressed in a sophisticated designer suit with perfect makeup, her vibrant voice brightened the atmosphere. My new clients have increased contract values by 15% compared to last year. Elizabeth sat quietly at the end of the table, listening to the family conversation. Though she was the eldest daughter in this family, she was the least noticeable presence. Her plain navy cardigan and white blouse, along with slightly tired eyes, told the story of her steady daily life. Elizabeth, how about you? Do you have anything to report? When Martha asked her daughter, there was a subtle change in her tone. It seemed more like a perfunctory question than one of expectation. Nothing special. Elizabeth shook her head slightly. The accounting firm is busy as usual. Last week had many companies with closing periods. That again, Richard sighed, interrupting her words. When are you going to challenge yourself with bigger work? You'll end your life just playing with numbers at a small accounting firm. But I like that work, Elizabeth quietly objected. Besides, didn't I recently review your company's financial statements? That's your duty, Richard waved his hand dismissively. It's only natural since it's the family company. You should be on the front lines like Caroline. Elizabeth silently sipped her tea. Her work at the small accounting firm was not understood by her family. In reality, her accurate financial analysis and detailed tax knowledge silently supported her father's real estate business. However, this was considered a given and never appreciated. Elizabeth is always so steady, her mother Martha said. Elizabeth had been hearing the indirect criticism in that voice for 15 years. But at your age, you could be more adventurous. Look at Caroline. She's always moving forward. Caroline smiled with satisfaction. That's right. I'm going to be in a TV commercial next month. It's for the company's image enhancement. Congratulations, Elizabeth said as cheerfully as she could. Being constantly compared to Caroline had become part of her daily life. Her sister was beautiful and sociable, showing everyone her joy in being involved with their father's business. In contrast, Elizabeth's preference for mathematics and statistics during her student days was always dismissed as an odd hobby in this family. Mom, would you like to come to the charity party with me this afternoon? Caroline changed the subject. The Daltons and Harrisons will be there too. Yes, of course. Elizabeth, will you come too? Martha's tone clearly indicated she expected her daughter to decline. I'll pass today. I need to check the quarterly reports for Father's company. Again? Richard shrugged. Can't you take a break on holidays? If you need more money, you should look for a higher paying job. No one realized that it was Elizabeth's meticulous financial management that had helped Walker Real Estate avoid crises several times. Elizabeth just nodded silently. She had learned from years of experience that arguing back was pointless. The aroma from the kitchen prompted Elizabeth to change the subject. The roast beef seems almost ready. Oh, yes, Martha stood up. Elizabeth, can you help set the table? The family watched Elizabeth quietly head to the dining room as if it were expected. She put on her late grandmother Ethel's apron, a memento from 15 years ago. Grandmother was the only one who had especially cherished Elizabeth. Ethel had taught Elizabeth how to cook and pass down old family recipes. It was the only thing she could be confident about in her family. "What should we do for Thanksgiving this year?" Elizabeth asked in the kitchen, and Martha turned around, surprised. "Oh, I was just about to mention that," Martha's voice conveyed excitement. "We decided to eat at a restaurant this year. Your father has made reservations at the Bloomdale. It's the most luxurious restaurant in Boston." Elizabeth stopped in her tracks. "But, the Thanksgiving dinner I make every year." "Elizabeth, we're celebrating your father's big deal this year. Caroline has also brought in a major contract. It's a special occasion to celebrate with the whole family." A special occasion. The only opportunity for Elizabeth's cooking to shine had been taken away. She continued setting the dishes in silence. "I see, all right. You'll come with us, of course," Martha said matter-of-factly. "Since you're family." "Yes, of course," Elizabeth smiled. She was only treated as a family member when it was convenient for them. She was quietly wondering, do I really belong here? Between her continuously successful father, sociable mother, and brilliant sister, did she, who chose to walk a normal path, truly belong as part of the family? Outside the window, autumn leaves danced in the wind, quietly falling to the ground. Elizabeth took a deep breath and continued preparing for dinner. In the twilight of Thanksgiving, Elizabeth took a deep breath as she looked up at the luxurious entrance of the Bloomdale. Her exhaled breath gleamed white in the cold air. Normally at this time, she would have been wearing an apron, focused on the final touches of the turkey. Instead, she was now dressed in a slightly tight black dress, heading for dinner with her family. The restaurant door opened, welcoming her with warm air and elegant piano melodies. When Elizabeth gave her name at the reception, the hostess nodded politely. "The Walker reservation, yes. Your family has already arrived." Elizabeth was led by the hostess across the glamorous dining room. Crystal chandeliers poured light from the ceiling, and refined artwork adorned the walls. Each table was placed at a sufficient distance to ensure privacy and comfort. Even from a distance, she could recognize her family's table. Her father Richard's imposing figure, her mother Martha's elegant silhouette, and Caroline's bright voice stood out amid the quiet conversations of other guests. They were already toasting with champagne and laughing. As Elizabeth approached the table, Caroline noticed her and stood up. "Elizabeth. You finally came." Caroline's voice had more mischief than joy in it. With a wide smile, she continued, "This table is for a real family. Could you sit over there?" Elizabeth couldn't understand the meaning of the words for a moment. Caroline pointed to a spot slightly away from the main table, where a small children's table had been placed. "This is..." As Elizabeth approached in confusion, she saw a name card placed on the table that read "Loser." Seeing those letters, she felt her stomach tighten. As Elizabeth was at a loss for words, she heard her parents laughing. Martha said, waving her hand gracefully. "Oh, it's just a joke. Since you were late, we set up a little prank." "Don't take it so seriously, Elizabeth," Richard added. "Can't you understand a family joke?" Caroline returned to her seat in high spirits, saying, "Today is a celebration of Dad's big contract. Let's all have a good time." Elizabeth felt her cheeks growing hot. Curious glances from surrounding tables were directed at her stranded figure. She raised her face, trying to maintain as much dignity as possible. "Of course, I know it's a joke," Elizabeth said quietly. She slipped the name card from the small table into her pocket and headed toward the family table. However, the seat prepared for her was at the corner of the table, facing almost directly into the server's pathway. "Oh, Elizabeth," Martha said. "You're wearing a black dress. You should have chosen a more festive color." "Yes, sister," Caroline agreed. "Such a funeral color for Thanksgiving." Elizabeth sat down silently. It would be pointless to explain that this was the only formal dress she owned. On an accounting firm's salary, she couldn't afford the designer dresses that Caroline wore. The waiter distributed menus, and Richard immediately ordered expensive wine. "Tonight is a special night. Let's enjoy the best." The table conversation began with tales of Richard's latest successful real estate deals. Martha listened to his stories with adoring eyes, smiling at appropriate moments. Caroline boasted about her sales performance, basking in her father's praise. Elizabeth sipped a little wine and stared at the menu. No one asked for her opinion on the Thanksgiving dishes. The value of the meals she had prepared with all her heart every year was now completely forgotten. While waiting for the food to be served, a gentleman who appeared to be the restaurant owner was making rounds to each table, checking on the guests. The stylishly suited man walked with confident steps, occasionally engaging in brief conversations with customers. As he approached the Walker family table, Richard stood up and shook his hand. "Michael Bloomdale. What a wonderful restaurant. We're honored to be welcomed by you." "The honor is ours, Mr. Walker," Michael responded politely. "We're privileged to have you choose our establishment." When it was Elizabeth's turn during the introductions, Caroline interrupted, "And this is my sister Elizabeth. She, well, works at a small accounting firm." Her tone clearly contained contempt. Michael turned to Elizabeth, bowing slightly to acknowledge her presence. There was a light of compassion in his blue eyes. "It's an honor to meet you, Elizabeth." Elizabeth smiled back. "It's a wonderful restaurant." Michael looked back at her with slight surprise. There was a light in his expression as if he had discovered something interesting. As dinner progressed, the family conversation increasingly excluded Elizabeth. Richard and Caroline talked about their work successes, and Martha boasted about her interactions with local dignitaries. Elizabeth's contributions, supporting her father's company finances and preparing Thanksgiving meals every year, were completely forgotten. When Elizabeth woke up the next morning, the memories of the previous night vividly returned. The humiliation at the Thanksgiving dinner. Her family's laughter. And the final joke. The coldness when the waiter placed the bill in front of her at the end of the meal, saying, "This is just for your portion, ma'am." Her family had even excluded her from their bill. However, she couldn't forget the unexpected salvation that happened at that moment. The restaurant owner, Michael Bloomdale, quietly approached and announced, "Tonight's dinner is on the house, by special recommendation of the chef." That act of kindness and preservation of dignity left warmth in Elizabeth's heart. As morning light filtered into her room, Elizabeth made a decision. She would go thank him for his kindness. She selected elegant casual wear from her small apartment closet and got ready. The Bloomdale was preparing for lunch service. The entrance door was open, but there were no customers yet. As Elizabeth hesitantly entered, a young staff member in uniform noticed her. "I'm sorry, but we're not open yet." "Yes, I understand," Elizabeth answered somewhat nervously. "I wanted to thank Michael Bloomdale." "What's your business?" The voice that turned around belonged to the man who had saved her dignity last night. Michael Bloomdale, in a casual shirt and slacks, gave a more relaxed impression than the previous evening. Yesterday's. Michael recognized her and smiled warmly. "Elizabeth Walker, right?" "You remembered." Elizabeth was a bit surprised. "Of course." Michael approached her and extended his hand. "What brings you here today?" "I wanted to thank you for last night," Elizabeth answered sincerely. "I'm very grateful for your kindness." Michael smiled and invited, "Do you have some time? Would you like some coffee?" When Elizabeth nodded, he guided her to the back of the restaurant. In a small office space next to the kitchen, staff were beginning preparations for lunch. Michael poured her coffee and offered her a chair. "Actually, yesterday I became interested in the story about your grandmother's traditional cooking," Michael said quietly. Elizabeth was surprised. During the meal, she had only exchanged words with Michael for a moment. "About my grandmother?" "Yes, when you moved to a seat a bit away during the meal, you were talking about traditional Thanksgiving dishes you learned from your grandmother. I happened to be passing by at that time." Elizabeth remembered. During dinner, on her way to the restroom alone, she had been approached by an elderly couple at the next table. The conversation turned to Thanksgiving, and she had talked a little about the special recipes she learned from her grandmother Ethel. "After hearing that, I became very interested," Michael continued. Actually, we're considering a new concept out of the Bloomdale. We want to offer authentic American traditional cuisine, not just high-end French food. Elizabeth nodded in surprise. That's a wonderful idea. Could you tell me more about those dishes? After a moment's hesitation, Elizabeth began talking about the recipes inherited from her grandmother Ethel. The special herb stuffing for turkey, the secret ingredient in cranberry sauce, and the sweet potato casserole recipe that had been passed down for generations. As she spoke, her eyes began to shine, and passion seeped into her normally restrained tone. Michael listened intently, occasionally asking questions. "That's wonderful," he said. "The soul of real American home cooking is there. Many people have forgotten that." "Cooking is something special to me," Elizabeth quietly confessed. "I work in the world of numbers, but my true passion is cooking. Would you make those dishes for us sometime?" Michael's suggestion was sudden. "Of course, we'll pay you. I'd like our chefs to see the essence of it." Elizabeth was so surprised she was at a loss for words. "I am not a professional." "That's precisely why it's valuable," Michael said eagerly. "Restaurant chefs may have perfect technique, but many haven't experienced the taste of home, real tradition." Elizabeth thought it over. Remembering yesterday's humiliation, perhaps it was time to start something that would take her out of her family's shadow. "All right," she finally answered. "I'll give it a try." The following Saturday morning, when the restaurant was closed, Elizabeth stood in the spacious kitchen of the Bloomdale. Under the watchful eyes of Michael and the restaurant's head chef Antoine, Elizabeth began cooking as her grandmother had taught her. "First, we apply herb butter not just to the outside of the turkey, but also to the inside," she explained. "And for the stuffing, instead of regular breadcrumbs, we use cornbread and pecans." Antoine wore the skeptical expression typical of a French chef, but as the cooking progressed, his expression changed. The aroma filling the kitchen was different from the sophisticated French scents, it was something nostalgic and heartwarming. When they tasted the completed dishes, the chefs fell silent. Antoine was the first to speak. "This is unexpected. Though technically simple, it has such a complex flavor. There's something here we've forgotten." Michael smiled with satisfaction. "Elizabeth, your cooking has soul. This is exactly what we've been looking for." He stood up from his chair and took Elizabeth's hand. "I want to start a weekend-only, traditional American home cooking special menu out of the Bloomdale. Elizabeth, I want you to join us as the head chef." Elizabeth was stunned. "But I'm not a professional. And I have my accounting job on weekdays." "Weekends only would be fine," Michael said eagerly. "Your recipes, your cooking with soul. I want to offer that to our guests." Elizabeth took a deep breath. This was a big change, a challenge that would take her out of her safe daily routine. But she was now feeling something she hadn't felt until yesterday, possibility. "All right," she finally answered. "I'll take on the challenge." Delight spread across Michael's face. "Wonderful. Let's start preparations next week." As Elizabeth left the restaurant, her steps were light. On her way back to her apartment, she considered what to do about her accounting work at her father's company and the monthly family meetings. Elizabeth was, for the first time, feeling the possibility of her choices taking a path different from her family's expectations. Remembering Michael Bloomdale's kind blue eyes and the value he found in her cooking, Elizabeth's heart filled with warmth. For the first time, someone had found true value in her, who had long been an invisible presence in her family. Before opening her apartment door, Elizabeth's smartphone rang. Looking at the screen, it was a message from her father. "Is the financial report for next week ready?" Elizabeth took a deep breath. "Yes, I'm preparing it," she replied, while a new determination was sprouting in her heart. A year had passed since Elizabeth began her weekend work at the Bloomdale. Her life had changed in ways she could never have imagined. The weekend limited menu named Elizabeth's Home Cooking Evening had become more popular than expected. Guests who initially came out of mere curiosity were charmed by the taste of her heartfelt cooking and became repeat customers. The simple flavors passed down from her grandmother, combined with Elizabeth's creativity, had captured the hearts of people seeking authentic taste. She hadn't quit her job at the accounting firm, but Elizabeth gradually shifted her work balance toward the restaurant. And most significant was the courageous decision she made: she quit doing the accounting for her father's company. "I will no longer be an invisible presence. I will work in a place where my value is understood." No one took those words she told her family seriously. Richard laughed off her decision as a joke, and Martha sighed, saying, "She'll be back soon." Only Caroline showed some signs of agitation, but quickly dismissed it with, "Sister, self-realization is important too." They didn't understand the true meaning. They couldn't imagine how much Walker Real Estate's financial foundation would be shaken by Elizabeth's departure. As winter turned to spring and summer passed, the first yellow warning light illuminated for Walker Real Estate. It was a notice from the tax office. There were deficiencies in the past 3 years' returns, and they would be audited. Ridiculous. Richard was furious. "Our company's finances are perfect." However, the new accountant, hired by Caroline after Elizabeth left, did not possess her meticulousness and expertise. They had overlooked the complex tax items that Elizabeth had processed with the utmost care every year. One early autumn day, as Elizabeth was devising a new menu for the restaurant, her smartphone rang. It was a call from Martha. "Elizabeth, we need to talk." Martha's voice lacked its usual confidence. "Your father and Caroline say the company's financial situation is a bit difficult. We need your help." Elizabeth quietly answered, "Mom, I'm not coming back." "But your family," Martha's voice trembled. "Family helps each other, don't they?" Elizabeth smiled wryly. "Have you forgotten that I wasn't real family?" The call ended in heavy silence. After finishing work at the restaurant and returning to her apartment, Caroline was waiting in front of her door. Without her usual glamour, she wore a tired expression. "Sister, I want you to hear me out," Caroline said in an unusually humble voice. In the small living room of the apartment, Caroline revealed the facts. Walker Real Estate was on the verge of bankruptcy. As a result of the tax audit, they were facing a large additional tax assessment. Additionally, Caroline's glamorous image strategy had been costly and hadn't generated actual sales. "Dad got anxious and ventured into high-risk investments," Caroline said tearfully. "And they failed. So, what do you want me to do?" Elizabeth calmly asked. "Please, Elizabeth. Dad's company is about to collapse. We need your financial knowledge," Caroline said with a serious expression. "We have nowhere to go back to without your help." Elizabeth stood up and gazed out the window. Rain was quietly beginning to fall. Wasn't I no longer a member of the family? A person who couldn't sit at the table for a real family? Caroline looked up. For the first time, genuine regret appeared in her eyes. "That was a terrible joke. I'm truly sorry. I regret it every day." Elizabeth remained silent, feeling the friction of years between the sisters. "You've always supported us," Caroline said with a trembling voice. "I took it for granted. I didn't properly see your value." Before Elizabeth could answer, there was a knock at the door. When she opened it, it was Michael Bloomdale. "Have I come at a bad time?" Michael said, sensing the situation. "We had a meeting scheduled, but—" "No, my sister was just leaving," Elizabeth said quietly. Caroline stood up, holding her bag with trembling hands. "Please, Elizabeth. Think about it." After she left, Michael gently asked Elizabeth, "Are you okay?" Elizabeth let out a deep sigh. "My family came asking for help. But—" Michael placed a hand on her shoulder. "Regardless of whether you help them or not, offering business advice is an option." Elizabeth looked up at him in surprise. "Why do you say that?" "They hurt me." "Yes, they did. But you're different from them," Michael said kindly. "Your strength lies in not losing your kindness even when you're hurt. That's why your cooking reaches people's hearts." Elizabeth silently nodded. There was truth in his words. The next day, Elizabeth visited Walker Real Estate. The office where she once worked as an employee had lost its vitality. The number of employees had halved, and there were signs that expensive decorations had been sold. Entering her father's office, Richard greeted her with an aged face. Martha and Caroline were also seated. "Elizabeth, you came," Richard's voice had lost its former dignity. Elizabeth calmly looked at them. "I'll give advice. But I'm not returning as family. This is business." The family fell silent at her words. Finally, Richard nodded. "I understand. Tell us, how can we save the company?" Elizabeth sat down and took a laptop from her bag. "First, show me all the financial documents. Let's start there." The hint of autumn had returned to Boston. The leaves of street trees were beginning to turn red, and people were gradually starting to wear thicker coats. The Thanksgiving decorations adorning the entrance of the Bloomdale announced the arrival of the season. Elizabeth was giving final instructions in the kitchen. Her new position as executive culinary director went beyond that of a mere cook. Over the past 2 years, her home cooking evening had expanded nationwide as Bloomdale Homestyle Tradition, with restaurants opening in 5 cities. "I'll handle tomorrow's Thanksgiving special," Elizabeth told the staff. Her voice carried confidence, and her demeanor exuded a calm dignity. Her formerly hesitant way of speaking had disappeared, and she had grown into a woman who knew her worth. "Elizabeth, can we talk for a moment?" Michael entered the kitchen. The kindness she received from him 2 years ago had developed into a deep relationship of trust. They were more than just business partners. In Michael's office, he showed her a special reservation list. "For tomorrow's Thanksgiving dinner, there's a reservation from the Walker family." Elizabeth nodded. With her guidance, Walker Real Estate had returned to stable management, albeit on a smaller scale. Richard had followed her financial analysis and adopted a more modest and sound management style. Caroline had also gone back to business school and was acquiring steady practical skills. "Have you prepared name cards for the table?" Elizabeth asked with a smile. Michael laughed at her joke and responded, "Should we prepare a special VIP table?" "No, a regular table is fine," Elizabeth answered quietly. "I want them to understand that real family is about respecting each other." The next day, Thanksgiving. The restaurant was fully booked from early on, and the staff was busy working. Elizabeth moved between the kitchen and dining area, occasionally enjoying conversations with guests. Her name was now featured in culinary magazines as Boston's guardian of traditional cuisine. At 6 p.m., the Walker family arrived. Elizabeth came out to the entrance herself to greet them. Richard and Martha had aged more than before, and Caroline was dressed in a subdued, elegant outfit. "Elizabeth," her father faced her. There was a sincerity in his eyes that had never been there before. "I'm truly proud of your success." "What a wonderful restaurant business," her mother added. "It was our mistake not to recognize your talent." Caroline hugged her sister. "I've learned so much from you, sis. What strength is, what true success is." Elizabeth smiled. She hadn't completely forgiven them, but her heart was healing. "Please, this way." She guided her family to an elegant table in the center of the restaurant. She remembered the humiliation 2 years ago when she herself was relegated to a children's table. But now, she was the star of this place. "I've prepared a special menu," Elizabeth quietly announced. "Grandmother's recipes, with just a bit of my own touch added." As the meal progressed, new conversations were born among the family. Richard frankly acknowledged his mistakes, and Martha spoke about her new activities supporting small local business owners. Caroline was passionately explaining a more honest approach in the real estate business. By the time dessert was served, Michael approached the table. He gently placed his hand on Elizabeth's shoulder and asked, "Are you enjoying yourselves?" "Wonderful food," Martha said with heartfelt gratitude. "We're proud of what you've built." Looking at Elizabeth, Michael quietly said, "You've taught us all something. A family doesn't need to be perfect. What's important is respecting and supporting each other." Elizabeth placed her hand on his. In her eyes were reflected a bitter past and a hopeful future. Families may fail, but true bonds are born from recognizing each other's value. She now understood this. Outside the window, snow had quietly begun to fall. The sense of a new season, a new beginning, gently embraced them.